Hey everybody, it's me, Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie, and you are watching another episode of I Bet You've Never Heard These 80s Albums Before. This is a show where I grab 5 random obscure albums and I talk about them, play a little bit of music, and hopefully introduce you to some music or remind you of something that you just need to pull out of your collection and play over and over again. I appreciate all the support that I've received for every episode of the show, and I hope that you come back and watch more. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, ring that bell, share this video with your friends. That certainly helps the algorithm for me. And I also appreciate a lot of the people that make suggestions for the show. I have a huge folder, and some of those suggestions I've already got just sitting, waiting in that folder, and some of them are new, and I will drag them into that folder. And I'm so happy that you are enjoying this series. But you know what? Yeah, that's right. I'm jibber-jabbering a little bit too much. So let's get this party started. I bet you've never heard this 80s album before. First album we're going to start off with, this is a band that I actually got into in 1980. The band is called The Vapors. And, of course, that first album was Nuclear Days. That's the album with Turning Japanese. And that was produced by Vic Coppersmith-Heaven, who had produced the Jam albums up to that point. I was a huge Jam fan, so I bought it because I figured it's got to sound like the Jam. Well, it didn't sound like the Jam, but it did not sound like the Jam either. Anyway, that album was big. I saw them, I think, twice on that tour. And the second time I saw them, they were doing songs from this album, Magnets. Now, this album was produced by David Tickle, who had produced Split Enz, True Colors, and Wayada. So I was familiar with his production, but I always felt that he added more layers to the band's sound, because Magnets was actually a concept album. And if you look at that album cover, this was created by the same gentleman, and my goodness, I apologize for forgetting his name, but he's an artist, and he's the one who created Where's Waldo? So rumor has it, Waldo was somewhere on the Vapors Magnets album cover. But this album, while it may not be just as immediate and punchy as Nuclear Days, has more layers, more depth, more emotion. It's a little bit darker. The songs are incredible. David Fenton has a way of just writing great verses, great middle eights, great bridges, and great choruses. And this album, like I said, it's not Turning Japanese, and they're not trying to make it sound like Turning Japanese. It's fantastic. David Fenton, Steve Smith, Howard Smith, and Edward Bazalgette. What an incredible band. I saw them on this tour, too. That was a great show. 2020 and Code Blue opened for them. Fantastic show. Florentine Gardens in Hollywood. Anyway, that's all gobbledygook nonsense. So let's give a listen to The Vapors, Magnets from 1981. Oh, my baby, what shall we do? Baby's in your black web, I feel blue. Johnny's in the corner shop waiting for you. He's got lots of... Look out, Johnny, she's got spiders. But he smiles. Johnny's in love again, whoa, whoa. They said, what's going on here then, son? Hello, hello. What's going on here then, son? We want to know. But they weren't convinced, no matter how I tried. They pinned me up against the wall. And my homemade jam and my plastic Jones, and it's so close. Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, and it's so close. Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, and it's so close. Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, Jimmy Jones, and it's so close to get healed. I bet you've never heard this 80s album before. Now, here's one that probably people remember the album cover if they were searching the bins back in 1978. I know people get a little upset because that's not 1980s, but I consider basically 77, 78 up to 86 really my wheelhouse for the 80s. So I like to throw those albums into the mix. But this album is by a gentleman by the name of Robert Johnson. No, not the blues artist who sold his soul at the crossroads. This is an American singer, songwriter, guitarist, producer. This album was recorded at Ardent Studios in Memphis. It was recorded at the record plant in New York, and it was recorded at Abbey Road, somewhere over there in the land of England. And this is just a great pop album. It's not power pop. It's kind of more along the lines of, like, let's say a Moon Martin or maybe even Rocky Burnett. Not quite Marshall Crenshaw, not anywhere close to like Warren Zevon, but there were so many great artists like this that were coming out at that time. And I know that this got a lot of press, but it just was not a big commercial album. It's really a fun, great guitar pop album. So let's give a listen to Robert Johnson, Close Personal Friend from 1978.
I'll be waiting for you to catch you next time around. I'll be waiting for you. I'm waiting for a taste of your love. Now find that I've just got a letter C. A little wish is more than make believe. Then I tell her there's no clouds in the sky, and wish upon a star tonight. Every time a guy like me gets down on his knee, maybe I should get control and think objectively. I say, girl, you really got me thinking. My mind is always dreaming. My love belongs to you. My love belongs to you. My love belongs to you. You might find a guy to love, 'cause I'm gonna set you free. So don't forget your special taste. You'll never find a guy like me.
I bet you've never heard this 80s album before. Next up, I have the second album by a band from the East Coast by the name of the Elektrics. Now, they had put out an album in 1980 called Current Events, sort of a play, the Electrics, Current. And a year later, see, here's something I noticed a lot about bands in the 80s. They all seem to have 2 album deals, and the first album and second album were pretty radically different from each other. Now, the album I'm going to talk about is their second album, and that's called State of Shock, another play on the Elektrics band name. And this was a lot beefier, a little more keyboards in it, very polished and just filled with great songs. The album was produced by Lance Quinn and Tony Bongiovi. You've got Marco Delmar on guitar, you've got Carl Warner on vocals, Chris James on bass, Bob Drew on keyboards, and Andrew Papa on drums. They put out 2 great albums and then they disappeared. But, this is just great, wonderful stuff. There were so many great bands coming out at this time. And if you've never heard it before, you are now going to hear a little bit from the Elektrics, State of Shock from 1981.
Don't know what it's like without you. Oh no. And every day I try getting through, but I just keep crying and crying and crying and trying to be. But my heart keeps beating oh so fast. Another night
I bet you've never heard this 80s album before. Now let's head over to New Zealand, and I'm going to introduce you to a band by the name of Swingers, or The Swingers. I mean, on their albums, on their records, it says Swingers, but everyone calls them The Swingers, so I'll probably accidentally call them The Swingers. This is a band that was led by Phil Judd, formerly of Split Enz. After he had left Split Enz, he got involved in sort of the indie scene in New Zealand, and he was working with a band called Suburban Reptiles, I believe. And then when that band split up, Phil Judd took a member or two and formed the Swingers. Now, the bass player of the Swingers was Bones Hillman, who actually then went on to join Midnight Oil. Now, the album came out in 1981 as Practical Jokers. And they took some songs off, changed the album cover, changed the album title, and they presented it in a much more, I guess you could say, American-friendly version. They remixed a few songs. Here's the thing about Swingers. They came out with a single called Counting the Beat, which was one of the best-selling Australian or New Zealand singles ever. I mean, it is still heard today on the radio, and this came out in, I believe, 1980, 81. And it's so catchy that even if you've never heard it, you listen to it, you go, oh my God, I got to own that. And you're just walking around just singing the la-da-dee-da part over and over in your head. But the album didn't do as well, because the album, see, Phil Judd likes to write songs with many layers. So even though the song could be 3 minutes long, the songs that Phil Judd writes and records, whether it's solo or with Swingers, he packs about 7 or 8 songs into one. So this could feasibly be, a 6 or 7 minute song like he did with Split Enz, but just jam-packed in tight little quarters. The harmonies have hooks along with the lead vocals, and the guitar has a hook, but sometimes the songs are so busy, it's hard to comprehend them in one sitting. And sometimes all people have the patience for is one sitting. But this is an album that delivers, and it still sounds amazing today because it is so different. It stands out. But again, I'm over-talking. Let's check out Swingers, Counting the Beat. This is the American album from 1982.
Well, it ain't what you dance, it's the way you dance it. It ain't what you move, it's the way you move. And I said, oh no, let's go dance all night at the disco. Moving around like a light on the town. Well, it ain't what you guess, it's the way you dance it. I need a dear inside. I'm feeling like sick.
I bet you've never heard this 80s album before. And finally, on this episode of I Bet You've Never Heard These 80s Albums Before, I'm going to talk about a young lady by the name of Tracy. Tracy Young is her full name, but back then she was recording just under her first name, Tracy. And she was, I guess you could call her a protege of Paul Weller. The Jam put out a single called Beat Surrender, and she's the female vocalist on that. But after the Jam split up, and Paul Weller started working with Style Council, he started a label called Respond Records. He signed artists like, let's say, The Questions and Tracy. He wrote or co-wrote or produced songs for Tracy while he was also working on the Style Council and the Respond Records label. Her first single was a hit. It was called The House That Jack Built. But by the time the album Far From the Hurting Kind came out, it was not on the UK version of the album, but they added it to the American version. And it's just a great poppy tune, but she has a wonderful voice. Elvis Costello wrote her a song called I Love You When You Sleep, which is a beautiful song. Another great thing about Tracy is that all the mod boys loved her, of course. But her music wasn't just made for the mod crowd. It was also pop. So by the time the album got released here in the U.S., there wasn't really a mod scene. Nobody really knew too much about it. Now, there was an underground mod scene, but Jam were never really big here. And Lambretto's Chords, Secret Affair, none of that stuff was really big here. So she was just out there in the pop world. So people were looking at her as a then modern pop artist. So the mod kids loved her and the pop kids loved her. So let's check out Tracy, Far From the Hurting Kind from 1984. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode of I Bet You've Never Heard These 80s Albums Before. I appreciate you checking it out, giving it a look, giving it a listen, and it's my extreme honor to always be here and present some great music to you. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like, comment, share, subscribe. Ring that bell for future notifications. And until the next time, hi, how are you? I'm Steve Schnee, the CD Junkie.